Thank you to everyone watching, and a special thank you to our subscribers. Your support means everything. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. She was a mother. She was expecting. She was filled with the kind of love that only a mother can understand. Boundless, unconditional, unshaken. In just a few months, she would hold her daughter in her arms, whisper promises of protection, of warmth, of a future they would build together. But she never got that chance. In the early days of 2024, something unthinkable happened. 2 lives were stolen. 2 hearts, one that had beaten for 23 years, the other that had only just begun, were silenced forever. And the man accused, the one who should have been there to protect them, to cherish them, the father of her unborn child. For those who knew Tamisha Price, this was not just a crime. It was a betrayal beyond comprehension. A man she once trusted, a man who should have been planning for their child's first breath, was now accused of orchestrating her final moments. But as investigators peeled back the layers of this case, they found more than just tragedy. They found unanswered questions. A case that seemed so clear was suddenly shifting. Because the evidence, it told a story no one expected. And just when it seemed like justice was within reach, a discovery changed everything. She was a mother. She was expecting. She had a future mapped out, tiny clothes folded in drawers, a name chosen with love, dreams built around the child she carried. Every heartbeat inside her was a promise, every kick a reminder that life was growing, waiting to be held. But that moment never came. In the early days of 2024, that heartbeat was silenced. 2 lives, one on the brink of new beginnings, the other just beginning at all, were taken in an act so violent, so devastating, that an entire community was left shaken. And the man accused of ending it all, the very person who should have stood by her side, the father of her unborn child. Tamisha Price should have been preparing for motherhood, not fighting for her life, but in a matter of moments that future was erased. The excitement, the love, the anticipation, gone, replaced with crime scene tape and whispered condolences. For those who loved her, the pain was unbearable. A mother robbed of the chance to hear her daughter cry for the first time. A family left grasping for answers, and a case that, at first, seemed clear-cut. But then the questions started. Because evidence doesn't lie, and what it revealed changed everything. Before her name became a headline, before her story became a case number, Tamisha Price was a daughter, a sister, a friend, a young woman full of life and love. She was 23 years old, young, ambitious, and excited for the future. To those who knew her, she was the kind of person who could brighten a room with just her presence. She had a way of making people feel seen, heard, and valued. But more than anything, Tamisha was a mother. She was just months away from welcoming her baby girl, Malaysia Leonie Price, a name she had chosen with care, with hope. She talked about Malaysia constantly, about the plans she had, the love she was ready to give. She had dreams of tiny hands wrapped around her fingers, of first words, first steps, bedtime stories, and whispered lullabies. But none of that would come to pass. Instead of a baby shower, there was a funeral. Instead of celebration, there was mourning. 2 lives were lost that night, one who had barely begun, and another who had so much more to live for. Her family, shattered by grief, described her as the heart of their home. Social media tributes poured in, messages of disbelief, sorrow, and love for the woman who was taken too soon. And as the community tried to come to terms with this tragedy, one question echoed through every conversation, every tear-stained post, every candle lit in her memory. Why? Why would someone do this? And how could the man who should have been standing beside her, Be the one accused of taking everything away. Love, it's supposed to be the foundation of a family, the force that holds people together, the reason two lives intertwine. It creates bonds that seem unbreakable, promises that feel eternal, and dreams that are built for a lifetime. But love can also change. It can crack under pressure, twist into something unrecognizable and, its worst, turn into something dangerous. Tamisha Price and Paris James once shared something. What that something was depends on who you ask. He was 25, she was 23. Their lives crossed in a way that led to the one thing that would connect them forever. Tamisha Price, their unborn daughter, but what should have been a time of joy, of preparation, of building a future together, came something else entirely. Their relationship was complicated. It wasn't the picture perfect love story. At times, it was fragile, filled with tension, misunderstandings, and quiet battles no one could see. Was there love between them? Maybe. Was there trust? That's harder to say. Some say Paris was excited about the baby. Others say he wasn't ready, that the responsibility of fatherhood weighed on him in ways he didn't know how to handle. But one thing is certain. As Tamisha's belly grew, so did the distance between them. What happened behind closed doors in those final months? Was it heartbreak? Was it heartbreak? Was it regret? Or was it something far more dangerous? Something only one of them could walk away from? Tamisha had dreams of raising her daughter, of creating a life filled with love and warmth. But was Paris a part of that dream? Or was he a threat to it? Those who knew them say there were signs. The kind you don't always recognize until it's too late. The phone calls that ended in frustration. The silences that spoke louder than words. The looks, the tension, the feeling that something just wasn't right. There were whispers of arguments, moments when love felt more like an obligation, when the excitement of a new life was clouded by the weight of unfinished conversations. And then, there were the messages. Screens illuminated in the dark, words exchanged in private. Was it frustration? Was it frustration? Was it anger? Or was it the beginning of something much, much worse? Tamisha wanted answers. She wanted security. She wanted to know what kind of father Paris would be to their daughter. But maybe she got an answer she never expected. January 14, 2024, a night like any other. The streets of Toledo, Ohio, were quiet, wrapped in the stillness of winter. The kind of night where most people were home, settling in, oblivious to the fact that somewhere out there, someone's life was slipping away. Inside a modest home, in a space that should have been filled with warmth, with plans for the future, with the anticipation of new life, there was something else. A silence, a stillness, a horror no one was prepared for. Tamisha Price, 23 years old, nearly 8 months pregnant, was found inside, shot, not once, not twice, but multiple times. Her body lay motionless, her unborn daughter, Malaysia, never given the chance to take her first breath. 2 lives gone. The walls of that home bore witness to something unspeakable. A crime so devastating, so unthinkable, that it would leave a hole in the hearts of everyone who knew Tamisha. But in that moment, in those early hours of realization, there were no answers, only questions. Who did this? Why? And what happened in the moments before the trigger was pulled? It was a crime that shattered families, that sent shockwaves through a community. And it all began with a single call to 911, a neighbor, a friend. Someone heard something that didn't sound right. Gunshots, the unmistakable echo of violence. And when officers arrived, they were met with a scene that would haunt them forever. There was no movement, no sign of life, just a young woman whose future had been stolen. The Lucas County Coroner's Office would later confirm what everyone already knew. This was no accident. This was no random tragedy. This was homicide. Intentional, cold, calculated. And in that moment, as detectives stood over Tamisha's body, as the harsh reality of what had happened set in, there was one thought on everyone's mind. Who could have done this? The answer was closer than anyone expected. Because when a woman is murdered, when a mother carrying life is taken so violently, the first question investigators always ask is, who had the most to lose? And that question would soon lead them to one name: Paris James. The father of the unborn child. The man who was supposed to protect them. Was it rage, fear? Or had this all been building, leading up to a night that would change everything? As investigators pieced together the timeline, combing through surveillance footage, phone records, and witness statements, a picture began to emerge. One that was darker than anyone could have imagined. A relationship filled with tension. A future filled with uncertainty. And now, a crime scene filled with evidence. But was it enough to bring justice to Tamisha and Malaysia? Or would the truth be harder to find than anyone expected? The weight of 2 lives lost hung over the city like a storm that would never pass. A mother and her unborn child, taken in an act so ruthless, so unforgiving, that even those who didn't know Tamisha Price personally felt the sting of her absence. And as the investigation unfolded, as detectives followed the trail of evidence, one name surfaced again and again: Paris James, the father of Malaysia. The man who, in another life, should have been there for every milestone. Her first steps, her first words, her first day of school. But instead, he was the name in police reports. The suspect at the center of it all. January 2024. Law enforcement made their move. Paris James, 25 years old, was arrested and charged with aggravated murder. A charge that sent a message. This was no crime of passion, no fleeting moment of rage. This was something deeper, something calculated. But as authorities dug deeper, one arrest was not enough, because Paris James wasn't the only one involved. Another name, another suspect. Jerry Scott, also 25 years old. His connection to the crime, unclear at first. But what detectives uncovered painted a picture of more than just a single man making a deadly choice. It was a web. A tangled network of betrayal, deception, and complicity. Jerry Scott was arrested, charged in connection with the murder. But why? What was his role? Did he pull the trigger? Did he help plan it? Or was his involvement something else entirely, something even more unsettling? And then yet another name entered the case. Shatwiya Triplet, 25 years old. She wasn't charged with murder, but obstruction of justice, which raised a question that sent chills through the community. What was she hiding? What did she know? And why, after everything, did she choose to protect the accused rather than stand for the woman who had lost her life? This wasn't just one person's crime. This was a conspiracy, a plan, a choice made by multiple people, each playing their part in a tragedy that stole not just one life, but 2. And as the pieces came together, as the story unraveled in police interrogations and courtroom documents, the truth of what happened that night became harder to ignore. Was Tamisha Price's fate decided long before that night? Had she been marked for death by the very people she once trusted? Or was there still more hidden in the shadows, more waiting to be uncovered, more that no one saw coming? The arrests were just the beginning. Because the real question wasn't just who was involved. It was why. For a full year, the case against Paris James, Jerry Scott and Chatouilla triplet seemed airtight. The arrests had been made. The evidence was damning. The community had accepted what had happened. That Tamisha Price and her unborn child, Malaysia, were gone because of a decision made by those who once stood closest to her. But in January of 2025, something changed. A single discovery. A revelation that sent shockwaves through the entire case, found on the very weapon that ended Tamisha's life. But it wasn't Paris James. It wasn't Jerry Scott's. It wasn't linked to anyone who had already been arrested. This DNA belonged to someone else. Someone the police had never named. Someone who, until now, had never been a part of the case. And in that instant, everything came into question. Because if this DNA was there, if another man's genetic imprint was on the murder weapon, what did that mean? Was there another suspect? Someone lurking in the background, watching as the police focused on Paris James and Jerry Scott? Someone who had a role in this crime, but had managed for an entire year to go unnoticed? Or was this something worse? Was this DNA enough to cast doubt on everything? For the defense, this was a lifeline. The case that once seemed ironclad now had a crack, one big enough for a jury to notice. Because how could the prosecution prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Paris James and Jerry Scott were the ones responsible, when another man's DNA was right there, on the very weapon used to kill Tamisha? And just like that, the trial was delayed. Prosecutors, once confident, were now scrambling. Who was this unknown individual? Was he a witness? An accomplice? Or worse, was he the real killer? For the family of Tamisha Price, this news wasn't relief. It was devastation. Because this wasn't just about the courtroom. This wasn't just about legal strategy or reasonable doubt. This was about Tamisha. This was about Malaysia. And the terrifying realization that after an entire year of thinking, they had answers. The justice they had been fighting for was slipping further away. And as investigators rushed to analyze this new evidence, one question haunted everyone involved. Had the wrong people been accused? Or was this discovery just the beginning of something even darker? Grief does not stay silent. Pain does not fade without answers. A mother and child were taken too soon. The city of Toledo was no stranger to tragedy, but this one felt personal. This one cut too deep. Tamisha Price wasn't just another name in the headlines. She was a daughter, a mother, a friend, a soul. She had dreams that stretched far beyond the life she was forced to leave behind. She had love to give. And her family. They were left standing in the aftermath, searching for justice in a world that felt cruel. There was no way to prepare for something like this. No way to truly understand the weight of loss. But they had to do something. They had to move forward. They had to make sure Tamisha was never forgotten. Her name couldn't just fade into another statistic, another case, another moment people would read about and ignore. Her children were still here. Their mother was gone. And in the face of tragedy, the family had a mission. They launched a GoFundMe, desperate to secure a future for the ones Tamisha left behind, to keep them safe. Because this wasn't just about grief. It was about survival. It was about making sure Tamisha's kids had a future. Donations poured in. Strangers, friends, even people who had never met Tamisha, they all came together in support. And beyond the financial help, something else was happening. Something bigger, something impossible to ignore. A movement was building, a voice was rising, and the demand for justice became louder than ever before. Local activists, women's rights groups, domestic violence advocates, they refused to let Tamisha's story go unheard. Marches filled the streets, voices crying out for change, banners held high with her name, painted in bold letters. Social media became a battlefield. People who had never spoken about violence before were now sharing her story. The question wasn't just about who pulled the trigger, it was about a system that allowed this to happen. How many women had suffered like Tamisha? How many warnings had been ignored before lives were lost? The justice system had to get this right. The courts had to hold the right people accountable, no mistakes. And for the public, patience was wearing thin. The new DNA evidence, it only made things more complicated. If there was another suspect, why hadn't they been caught yet? How many people had played a role in this? Tamisha's family wasn't just grieving anymore. They were fighting. They were demanding answers, refusing silence. And in every vigil, every speech, every post that carried her name, one message was clear. This was not over. The case is far from over. The truth is still tangled in uncertainty. And the clock keeps ticking forward. A young mother is gone. Her unborn daughter never got the chance to take her first breath. Families are shattered. A community demands answers. And yet, the justice system moves at a pace that feels unbearable. Paris James remains behind bars, facing the weight of the charges stacked against him, waiting for what comes next. Jerry Scott's name is tied to the crime, but his role remains a question mark in the eyes of many. Chatouille Triplet was accused of obstruction, but was she protecting someone or just caught in the chaos? Then the DNA, evidence that could shift the entire case, evidence that raises more questions than it answers. Whose DNA was on the weapon? Was this another suspect? A missing link? Or something much more complex? The prosecution is re-examining every detail. The defense is preparing for battle. And the trial remains in limbo. For Tamisha's family, there is no comfort in waiting. There is no closure in the unknown, just pain. The streets of Toledo still echo with the calls for justice. The voices demanding accountability have not faded. This case was never simple. It was never clean. And with every new piece of evidence, it only grows deeper. A young mother, an unborn child, and a crime still full of unanswered questions that refuse to be ignored. Justice is not always swift. It is not always clear. But will it be served before time runs out? What do you think? Does this new DNA change everything? Could another suspect still be out there? Let us know your thoughts. The story isn't over yet, and neither is the fight for justice.